I'm going to be talking to Bryan Helfenbaum of Alberta Innovates about a new program they've introduced, Digital Innovation in Clean Energy. It's going to invest in sorts of programs like developing artificial intelligence to reduce emissions in oil and gas production, that sort of thing. So welcome to the interview, Bryan.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Well, look, why don't we start off with an overview of this program, please? What is it, and what are the objectives?
Sure. It's actually a follow-up program to one we launched about a year ago. So in early 2020, we supported 17 different projects that look at various digital technologies. So to rhyme off some of those buzzwords, in artificial intelligence and machine learning, augmented reality, drones, digital twins, and all sorts of digital technologies. And then they're being applied across energy projects. And some of those are in more conventional oil and gas, and some are being applied in oil and gas, but are cross-sectoral in nature, and others are looking at smart grid, battery metals, and other technologies. So it's a pretty broad program, both in terms of the technology scope, as well as the end-use application. We have $2.5 million available, total funding, up to $350,000 per project.
Now, I first wrote about digital technologies in oil and gas production about, I think it was 2017 was the first time. And at that time, I remember one of my experts telling me that, digital technologies had been applied in manufacturing and other industries, 10, 15, 20 years prior. Oil and gas was a little slow catching up, but it was really the beginning of a wave then. And it seems now that digital technology, everybody's got it. And Alberta has been an innovator in technology for a long time. I don't think it's really as well understood just how innovative Alberta is. And so what are some of the companies that, what kind of projects are we looking at that might get funded under this program?
So you're right. Alberta has a rich history of innovation going back to AOSTRA days. There's a long list of innovation. And then even in the digital space, the Alberta Machine Intelligence Institute, AMI, is a bit of a well-kept secret. It puts Alberta, third jurisdiction in terms of machine learning. So there's really a lot here. And you're right, since 2017, we're seeing significant uptake of various technologies. And I would say early on, many companies were, I'll say, working at the edges, working on deploying digital around support services. And in more recent years, we're now seeing them starting to apply it to the core operations. And of course, that's a much bigger risk proposition, but a much bigger reward. And as these technologies have matured, we're seeing that happen now. So it's dangerous for me to speculate, the kinds of which companies we might support, but I can speak to a handful that we supported in DICE 1, the first call. There were projects like say Medalla and Revival, who were working on digital technologies applied specifically to oil and gas operations and optimizing their production or their monitoring. There were projects like Exergy and Galatea. Exergy is working on augmented reality, Galatea working on waste optimization. Both of those are working with clients in oil and gas, but as you can imagine, those are technologies that are cross-sectoral very naturally. Any industry that makes waste, which is every industry, can certainly make use of Galatea's technology, et cetera. And then, we have funded the universities. The U of C has a project with respect to reservoir optimization, and the U of A had a project with respect to smart grid using blockchain. But predominantly, it's an interesting space because it is dominated by the small and medium enterprises that are more nimble and looking to build in an agile manufacturing environment.
Now, one of the focuses these days, Bryan, is greenhouse gas emissions, because governments are clamping down, and there's a lot of focus on that in the oil and gas industry in particular. And I'm wondering if you can offer any insights into how technologies like artificial intelligence, for instance, how that might be used to reduce GHG emissions in oil and gas production.
Sure. So there are lots of different examples here. I mentioned Medalla. They have basically an online optimization of SAGD, which reduces the steam oil ratio. And if you are using less steam to make the same amount of oil, then that is a significant reduction in greenhouse gases. Galatia's waste optimization software reduces the amount of truck traffic on the roads, which spews out GHGs. And Exergy's virtual reality environment allows people to avoid traveling to site, which reduces GHGs. So most of these technologies do have an impact on GHG reduction. Some very significant, some it's a little bit less so, and there are other benefits as well. And it's notable, you know, for example, there's a drones project through PTAC using drones beyond visual line of sight, which is not just a GHG impact, but also works on spill mitigation and, you know, effects on water and land. So you're right. Right now, there's an overemphasis on GHG reduction, but many of these projects also have positive benefits for water and land impacts.
Does Alberta have a fairly significant tech sector? I mean, you know, like, is it a small cluster, a medium-sized cluster, a large cluster relative to other, you know, oil and gas jurisdictions like maybe Houston, something like that?
So a great question. I don't have the numbers at my fingertips. I would suggest that Alberta has a fairly well-developed sector with respect to the digital environment. We're seeing a lot of products coming to market that are, you know, born and raised in Alberta. It is still nascent in a sense because, as you said, I mean, it's really only a few years old. But the startup environment is very, very strong in this area, and because it's low capital intensity, you know, the barrier to entry isn't very high relative to some of these more capital intensive industries that we're used to working in. So we see a lot of startups. The challenge for many is the scale up stage. And I would say in general, Alberta has a much better startup environment than people think. But the scale up of moving from that small enterprise to a more medium sized is really a challenge. And in fact, you know, Alberta Innovates just launched an accelerator program to help with that problem.
Yeah, we see that in any number of industries related to oil and gas in Alberta. It's I think they call it the Valley of Death, where you're moving from the sort of pilot project, demonstration project, and then into commercialization and scaling it up. Is that where Alberta Innovates is trying to bridge the Valley of Death?
Yeah, exactly. So within my division of clean resources, we are specifically targeting that technology readiness level 2 to 6 range, which encompasses the Valley of Death as projects scale up. Now, digital innovation is particularly interesting because it tends to be less vulnerable to that Valley of Death because that capital intensity isn't quite as high, and it's able to leapfrog. So it's really just trying to help many of these startup companies that are very cash restricted and helping them to connect with some of the end users to be able to accelerate these projects forward.
Great, Brian, thank you very much for this. Really appreciate your insights.
Yeah, thank you.